tomorrow. I gotta go to Chris Evans on Thursday.
Okay. Welcome. Tonight we have our Town Council School Committee initial budget hearing, and welcome. We know that this is a very busy week, so we appreciate the attendance here as well as the audience. The date is Monday, December 19th, and the time is 7:10. If we could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I think if we can start with introductions, maybe we'll have some new viewing audience, to view our session tonight. So, if you want to start with Alan.
Alan Lord, Town Finance Director.
Steve Alford, Town Manager.
John Richard, Director of Administration.
Kristen Stringfellow, School Superintendent.
Maureen Carter, Chair of the School Committee.
Anthony Mega, Vice Chair of the School Committee.
Raisa Mosher, School Committee.
Rick Angeli, School Committee.
Ella Whaley, Town Council.
Carol Hagan McEntee, Town Council.
Jim O'Neill, Town Council.
Thank you. And if we just look at the purpose of tonight's meeting, it's to have the status of the fiscal year 2011-2012 budget program and its impact on the development of the fiscal year 2012-2013 budget. And then we will be, after we have the conversation here at the table with the presentation from Mr. Alford and Dr. Stringfellow, then we will be opening questions and comments from the audience, public hearing. So, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Alford.
Before we start tonight's discussion, could I ask everybody to stand for a moment of silence? I like that in recognition of the passing of George Bud Lord, our community's finance director's father, and probably his best friend. So I'd ask you just for a moment of silence. Thank you.
Thank you.
In starting off tonight, we have prepared a PowerPoint presentation, as well as the school superintendent has one as well. So we're going to try to move through both of those relatively quickly to provide council and school committee with sufficient time for dialogue and discussion on the development of the budget process. In starting out, wanted to talk first about the goals to be accomplished in terms of our budget development session this evening. One is to provide general information relative to South Kingstown's budget development process and the adoption process itself. You can follow along on the handouts. They are available at the desk coming in for anybody in the audience, as well as I think council and school committee have received their own individual copies. Secondly, tonight is to provide documentation relative to the budget tax base, looking at property tax projections, new projects, cost factors, as well as the contractual obligations that both the town municipal program and the school department will be facing over the next budget cycle. Third is to solicit comments from the public relative to the general goals and objectives of the budget for the ensuing year. The budget development process is identified in the town charter that was last amended on November 7th of 2006 with the adoption of the amendments to the charter. The meeting schedule was published in the December 15, 2011 edition of the South County Independent. The meeting schedule is also available on the town's website with www.southkingstownri.com. It's also available in the libraries and at Town Hall, and any questions can be referred to the manager's office. The next chart that I'm showing is the budget adoption process. Again, I think that people are somewhat familiar, since this will be the third year that we have instituted the process. Essentially, what we're looking to do is between December 1st and January 15th, we hold this initial budget session. By the February 14th, the school committee submits their proposed budget to the town manager for incorporation into the town manager's budget. That is to incorporate the transfer of the property taxes that would go from the town tax levy to the school department for its operations. We then have several meetings that are planned after the submission of the manager's budget on March 1st. Those meetings have been tentatively set for March 5th, 6th, 7th, and 14th. The 14th being the meeting between council and school committee relative to the school component of the municipal budget program. The council would then be looking to adopt a preliminary budget by March 19th. We would then be scheduled for 2 public hearings on the preliminary adopted budget of the council. That preliminary budget public hearings would be held on April 10th and April 11th. The next component of the process is that after those public hearings have been conducted, any taxpayer has the ability, with 25 signatures, to ask for specific up or down increases or decreases in either the municipal or school budget. Prior to the final adoption of the final budget document by the town council, which must be completed by May 1st, and this year is scheduled for April 30th for the public hearing and budget adoption, the council would be required to consider and specifically vote on each of those petitions that would be submitted that had been approved through the canvassing authority as having the required signatures. Subsequent to the council's final adopted budget, the public then has the opportunity with 200 signatures to request changes in the adopted budget, provided that the request for change exceeds $250,000, either as an increase or a decrease. If there are multiple petitions that are submitted that would go to referendum, then the council's budget would go as one component as presented alongside of the request for referendum increases or decreases. If there was more than one request to amend either the town budget or the school budget, there could be several petitions within that one referendum question. That with the highest vote would be the carrying budget directive. So if there was a request to increase the budget by $250,000 and there was a town council budget that obviously wouldn't allow for the $250,000, whichever had the highest vote count would be executed. So if the $250,000 reduction received the most votes, the school committee would be required to reduce that budget by $250,000, or conversely, if it was on the town side, the town would be required to reduce it by the amount. $250,000 is the minimum that the referendum will be considered for. The referendum question could be at any dollar amount, as long as it exceeded the $250,000 in either direction from the adopted budget. If a referendum was required, the referendum would be conducted on June 5th of 2012, and that is based on it being the first Tuesday following the first Monday, first Saturday of the month of May. So that is the budget schedule, and again, those schedules are posted, and would be subject to change at the direction of the council, but there would be need for notice. In starting out, I want to reference Senate Bill 3050, which was adopted in 2006, which establishes the budget cap. Budget cap for the 2012 year would be a levy increase of no more than 4%. There are certain exceptions that can be taken to that. However, I'm not going to go into detail on that this evening. I want to talk a little bit about the landscape in which this budget is going to be developed. Rhode Island is lagging behind the national economy's recovery. We continue to see that Rhode Island is one of 5 states at this point that have a greater than a 50% probability of falling back into a double-dip recession. So we have a fragile economy as we prepare the budget document, which means that conservatism as well as austere measures must be considered in the development of that budget. Rhode Island also has the potential for loss of federal aid programs due to the mandatory requirements for federal budget reductions. That is also going to play a role in the state economy as we move forward over the next 18 months. There's also concern within Rhode Island on the continuing loss of taxable property. I think, as everyone is aware, as we move forward, we're required to have revaluations every 3 years. As we have seen the fall within the housing market, what we're seeing is that reductions in the area of 10 to 15% are probable in terms of revaluations. Most recent data that we're reviewing at this point is showing single neighborhoods that are showing housing prices that are off by 10% from what assessment values are, in both directions. We're seeing houses selling for more than what the average price is in that neighborhood. We're seeing them 10% below. So there is an erratic market at this point, and once we do the next revaluation, which will be for ownership as of December 31 of 2012, it's a question mark as to how that market change is going to be interpreted through the revaluation company. We are also seeing slow growth continuing in new construction activities. This means that we're seeing less increases in the overall tax roll as we go forward. Increases in taxable property allow us to generate greater tax levy without increasing rates. Therefore, without the growth in new constructions, we have minimal new tax dollars that are available unless there's a greater tax effort that's required in terms of an increased rate. Moving on, we're also looking at the property tax cap is a concern because it provides constraints on municipalities in terms of being able to meet needs that would exceed the 4% levy amounts. But I also want to point out the good things. South Kingstown continues to maintain about a 12.7% or $9.3 million undesignated fund balance in the general fund. The school department is also maintaining about $2.1 million in the school fund. This is an anomaly to many of the Rhode Island municipalities. The report was prepared today and released today from Moody's Investment Services, suggesting that the lowering of bond rates in Rhode Island municipalities can continue. Since 8 have occurred during calendar 2011, there's a potential for additional rate reductions. It's important to note that South Kingstown's bond rating is the highest in the state. There's only 4 communities with a AA1. South Kingstown is one. I believe the other 3 are East Greenwich, Barrington, and Middletown. We also continue in our process of reducing bonded indebtedness as a means of reducing debt service, and that is scheduled to continue through the 2014 year. So I think that the most important point that I want to present here is that while we are feeling the impacts of higher unemployment, lagging behind a national economy, a state that is in jeopardy of seeing federal program reductions that will impact service levels at the state level. There are some things that aren't going to affect us. We're not going to lose additional state aid on the municipal side of the budget. The only place that we can lose it would be within the school programs, which is something that needs to be carefully watched, particularly once the governor's budget is released in February of next year. In moving on, I wanted to present what the growth in property tax levy has been over the past 6 years, during the time that we've had the tax cap in place. As you can see, in the 2006-2007 year, we were at the cap, the 5.5%. We were at the cap in the 7-8 year, as well as in the 8-9 year. From 2009-10, as well as 10-11 and the 11-12 year, while the cap has been at the 4.75, 4.5, and 4.25%, our tax levy increases have bordered on about 1%. We have made considerable efforts to be able to reduce the dependence on the property tax burden for meeting both the municipal and the school expenditure requirements, and I think have been quite effective over the past 3 years. I touched on the property tax roll history, and here is a 6-year snapshot of what the roll has been. As you can see, in the 06-07 year, we were at a $4.2 billion roll. With revaluation for December 31st of 2006, that roll escalated by $1 billion, or a 24% increase, up to $5.2 billion. It went up again moderately in the 8-9 year and the 9-10 year. In the 10-11 year, the year of the revaluation, at a time when the recession had begun, we saw a marked reduction. That reduction was a decrease of about 17%. It would have been about 14.5% on real property. The remainder was loss on motor vehicles, but about a 17% reduction. This reduction from the 5.3 billion down to 4.5 did not reduce the tax levy, because the tax rate was increased to be able to compensate for the reduction in the taxable property. In the current year, the 11-12 year, we saw a very modest increase in the amount of taxable property within the community. The next chart shows the differentials from the 9-10 year forward. 9-10, we saw an increase of almost 1% on taxable property. It went down by the 17% in the 10-11 year. In 11-12, it went up 0.23%, and in the 12-13 year, we're anticipating that that increase will probably be half of what it was in the current year, or a 0.11. One of the major reasons that we're anticipating such a small growth in taxable value for the 12-13 year is that we are anticipating a potential loss of $15 to $16 million on Snyder Electric's inventory holdings in West Kingston. We had experienced about $15.5 million in reductions during the current year. We expect that that will continue in the 12-13 year. So while we'll be losing $16 million there, gaining $20 million in new property, the net would be about $4.6 million. Now again, remember that I'm forecasting this in December. The budget will be prepared for a March 1 date. We'll be evaluating each of those different components, and hopefully we'll see greater growth potential than we're seeing right now. But it's important for us to provide conservative estimates at this time as we start the foundation work for the budget development. One other concern I have on the tax roll before we leave it is that there's been a great deal of discussion over the past 6 months on the motor vehicle component of the tax roll statewide. 2 major complaints have been voiced. One is that the value of motor vehicles is extremely high based on taking the book value of a clean vehicle and using that for all motor vehicles. There will most likely be legislation introduced in the next session of the General Assembly to change the assessment practice. If that occurs and there is a reduction in the values, that will have impact on what the taxable property roll is. As noted on this chart, motor vehicles represent $170 million in taxable property at a higher tax rate at $18.71. If that were to be reduced, we would either need to reduce the levy overall, or we would need to increase the effort that comes out of the real estate portion of the roll. So I'm concerned that we will see changes there in terms of what the assessment practice requirements will be once that gets through the General Assembly. The second component, which is also a concern, is that there are probably 39 different tax rates being used statewide for motor vehicles. Ours at 1871 is well below that of Providence, which is, I believe, in excess of $70. So the question would be, are they going to reduce the assessment ratio and at the same time try to provide uniformity statewide as far as a rate is concerned? Obviously, if the rate went up above the 1871, it would have positive impact, but if the assessment value was down, it could have negative connotations once that legislation is brought through the budgetary process at the state level. So I see that as another unknown which could have impact on all municipal budgets as we move forward. I wanted to present with this tax classification as to where the taxes come from in South Kingstown. The residential component of the tax base is roughly 82 cents. So for every dollar that we collect, and in the current year, the 11-12 year, our tax roll was for $66.1 million. 81.7% comes from residential. If we assume that there's another 5% approximately that comes from motor vehicles, residential is probably responsible for in excess of 85% of all the taxes that are collected or levied in the town. Our commercial base is at about 12%, industrials at less than a point, as well as the utilities of less than a point. So when we look at the burden increases that come with a budget, it's really having profound impact on the homeowner. And that's something that also has to be front and center in terms of evaluations of budgetary policies as we move forward. The next chart on page 13 provides a look at the levy increases over the last 4 years. And I think that the more important component here is to look at the need for increases on the municipal share has gone from about 19.4% up to 22.4%. That 3% increase is directly associated with the loss in the state aid over that same period of time. You can see that the municipal expenditures at the bottom of the sheet, that we're not seeing increases in the overall percentage of the municipal program. It's staying roughly at the 27% rate over that 4-year term. We are seeing, however, the tax transfer for the schools edging upwards by approximately 1%. We have offset that with decreases in both the capital programs and in the debt service. But I think if you look at the bottom line here, the budget that was adopted for the 8-9 year was at $86.2 million. That which was adopted in the current year was down to $83.6 million. So there's been substantive reductions in the overall spending programs for the community, yet at the same time, there's been greater tax effort required through the property tax roll. When we look at the revenue side of the budget for that 4-year period on page 14, we can see that the current year property taxes in the 8-9 year was under 85% of the overall budget, and it's escalated up to almost 88.5 88.5%. So there's over a 4% increase in effort, even though you've seen the reduction in the expenditure statements itself. One of the large changes here was in 8-9, state aid was over 7% of the municipal budget program. That's now dropped down to about 3.2. And when we look at the 3.2, most of that is pass-through money that's coming through the meals tax or the hotel tax. It's not coming from the income tax or the sales tax that's collected from each of our residents. We look at the school funds revenue statement. We're seeing that the tax effort, again, from the property tax level has gone from 80 to the 82.5%. And combined, when we look at the combined revenue statement, 4 years ago, property taxes made up less than 73.3%, and they're now making 78.6%. So there's continuing burden increases, even though there's reductions in the expenditure program based on the adjustments that have been made with the loss of the state aid. And it's not just state aid on the municipal side, it's state aid reductions on the school side. If you look at the combined revenue statement, we're seeing on the going from 18.4 to 13.4. That's also indicative of reductions for the aid to education. The next chart is a chart that looks at our labor force in South Kingstown. And I've presented the chart in two ways. The upper chart shows the number of employable individuals as well as the number of employed. So when that area, the yellowish or white area on that map is showing that we're not seeing a reduction in the labor force, we're seeing a reduction in the available people that have got full-time jobs. Right now, in November of 2011, we're at 9.2%, which is the same of what the average was for the 2009 year. To give you an idea of labor force in South Kingstown is comprised in November of 2011 of 15,895 people. Of that amount, 1,463 are unemployed and seeking full-time employment. These numbers are not going to show you the number of people that are underemployed in the community, and they're also not going to show you people that have exhausted unemployment benefits and still have not become employed. So the number is exceptionally high for South Kingstown. You can see between the years 2000 and 2007, we were in the area of the 3.5 to 4.5%. That's where we would expect to be once we see the economy turn around. Now, moving on to the budget development guidance. On the preliminary expenditure considerations, we're not anticipating increases in service levels for the 11-12 year. We are expecting about a $25,000 increase in the cost of conducting 11s and elections in fiscal 2013. Also, it's got to be pointed out that, that all 4 of the municipal labor contracts on the municipal side expire on June 30th of 2012. And on the school side, we have seen 2 of the 3 contracts ask for reopeners. Of their 3 contracts asked for reopeners. So what we're looking at is contractual obligations that are non-defined at this point in terms of agreements between the groups. We're also anticipating about a 1% increase in the healthcare transfer to the healthcare reserve fund. This is net of an average 15% employee copay. We're also estimating about $110,000 increase in the cost of municipal retirement, and I'll get into that in a couple of minutes in a little bit more detail. We're also anticipating a reduction in net debt service for both municipal and school of about $478,000. And again, this is part of the overall capital improvement program where our efforts have been to minimize new bonding efforts as a way of reducing the proportionate share of debt service in the budget document. The capital budget on the municipal side is looking at about a $29,000 decrease in the capital program. And we're also in the development of the performer, indicating no more than a 2% increase in the property tax transfer to the school fund. That is not to say that I'm proposing a 2% increase in the transfer to the school fund. What I'm saying to you is that in providing a performer for the budget, I need to have a gate point for us to be able to see what a 1% and what a 2% would mean as far as burden increases on the tax levy. As far as the revenue considerations are concerned, we're preparing the budget assuming the $3,000 exemption would stay at the municipal level, and we're assuming that the reimbursement from the state will not exceed the $500 it has been. But again, as my prior comments, I'm concerned as to changes that may occur. In fact, there was a letter to the editor in the Journal today suggesting changes that were going to be introduced. While those changes sound fine, they really have not done any fiscal impact as to what it would mean to the municipalities statewide. I'm also projecting about a $140,000 reduction in investment income. That is that in the current year, we had anticipated about $240,000 coming from idle fund management. At this point, we're looking at idle funds generating probably less than $100,000 this year. The investment rates are, well, there really are no investment rates at this point. I think at this point, we're
About 25 basis points.
about 0.25. And I think I've mentioned in years past, in some years, we've made as much as $1.4 million in earnings. Now we're looking at next year's budget being prepared down from 240 in the current year to about 100,000. We're not anticipating any change in the amount forwarded from undesignated fund balance. We're anticipating the $1.2 million will be forwarded from fund balance as a means of reducing tax effort requirements. And as I mentioned earlier, we're also looking at the potential of a $5 million growth in the taxable property base. That $5 million would generate only about $78,000 in new monies for the community. Again, tax roll is something that we'll look very carefully at over the next few months before that value is put into the manager's recommended budget. The pro forma budget at this point, what I have prepared is based on the assumptions that I've presented to you. We would be looking at an operating program that would be up about 2.2%, yet debt would be down debt would be at about $4,500 of an increase on the municipal side. We're also showing what that 2%, if it were provided in the school fund transfer, would be worth about $964,000. So the overall budget, if it was as presented in the pro forma, would show approximately an $864,000 increase, or about 1.2%. In looking at the revenue stream, the local revenues, we're anticipating a reduction of about $157,000. A portion of that is a loss of rental property income. Cox Communication has gone out of the wireless business. They were leasing from the town at the tune of about $72,000 space on the two water tanks and at the antenna at the Public Services Building. So that will be lost as an income for the 12-13 year. And again, the $140,000 that in investment earnings is offset by some small increases in other revenue sources at the local level. We're also anticipating that we'll see an increase of about $50,000 in open space fund transfer to pay down debt service. When we look at a summary of the pro forma budget, the non-property tax revenues are down about 1%. Prior year taxes are up, but it's a small piece of the overall budget. And the property tax need would increase by about 1.38%. Overall budget would be $67 million if, in fact, all of the things that we've talked about so far were incorporated into that document. The effort, the $67 million, I'm sorry, is the property tax levy that would be necessary would be up about 1.37%. On page 21, I'm giving you a summary of the pro forma and showing it as far as what the tax burden would be. We're starting out with a budget of $74.236 million, and that's made up of $51.5 million at the schools and $22.6 million on the town side. The dollar amounts that are here take the debt service that a school is associated along with the property tax transfer to the school fund. We're also reducing the non-property tax revenues that are being reduced there are proportionate to those that belong to the schools. Most of the school transfer reduction as far as non-property tax revenues is directly related with the money that comes from the state to pay down debt service on school buildings. It's going to be about $856,000, which is down from the $906,000 that was in the current year budget. So at this point, what we're looking at is, as far as property tax would be concerned, is that the schools would consume about 77% to the 23% on the municipal side. If the budget went through as presented in the pro forma and the tax roll stayed based on the 0.11% increase, we'd be looking at a tax rate increase requirement of around 19 cents, and the overall levy increase would be up about $900,000. That would be close to what occurred during the current year. Moving on to page 22. 22 shows the general fund expenditures, proportionate shares between municipal and school, showing really a municipal budget at about 70% school share and 30% municipal share. The general fund revenues, 88.6%, and this is one of the numbers that's troubling. 88.6% is made up of property taxes. That number is very difficult for us in terms of being able to continue to maintain the bond rating that we have when we start looking at that much of a requirement coming from property taxes. When we look at the overall share ratios there, that's inclusive of the overlay, we're still looking at a levy of $67 million. When we look at the pro forma, the municipal school transfer is up $964,000, which is the 2%. And again, this is for discussion purposes. If we move on, under the debt service, the debt service component, as I mentioned, will be seeing a reduction of about $478,000 in property tax effort that won't be necessary. So this is both looking at the schools and the municipal. We'll see about a $478,000 reduction. The overall debt service is going down by over $550,000, but the tax effort is only going to be $478,000 because we've got less revenues from third-party sources than we did in the current year. Moving on to the state aid to education, you can see in state aid to education, general state aid in 2007 was up at $3.5 million. It's now down to $529,000 is what we're anticipating in budget 13. When we look at the construction reimbursements for both the school and the libraries, it's down from $1.1 million down to $857,000. This is why, as I said to you earlier, we're seeing a larger reduction in debt service than what the net effect is on the property tax savings to the community. And you can see that the only place that we're seeing increases is on the pass-through revenues. This would be the public service corp taxes, the meals tax and the hotel tax is up to about $1 million that's forecast for the 2013 year. Overall, we're looking at about a $53,000 reduction from what we're estimating that we'll get in the current year from state sources. And I think the most telling issue here is that the state aid made up over 8% of the budget in 2007. We're forecasting it at less than 3.3% in the 2013 year. This is municipal aid coming to the general fund. This doesn't deal directly with the state aid to education through the school fund. When you look at it, take the numbers away and just look at the bar chart, you can see what the differences mean in terms of why the overall effort as far as property taxes have escalated. Capital budget, we'll be dealing with the capital budget on first week in January, on Wednesday and Thursday, the January 4th and January 5th. Those meetings are at 6:30. On January 11th, council will be reviewing the school's capital improvements as well. So there's 3 meetings on the capital budget. At this time, general fund capital budget is down $29,000 from what was budgeted in the current year. Utilities are up. None of that has tax impact because that comes out of rate base. And the school fund's up $120,000, but of that $120,000, a portion of that we had reduced in last year's budget by spending the dollars in advance of the close of the prior fiscal year. But there's still a good deal of discussion on dealing with the capital needs for the school fund for the 13 year that will come up during the January 11th session. The next chart on page 27, and I'm not going to spend a lot of detail on this, provides the prior 3-year history as far as labor contracts, as it deals with salary increases, the co-share associated with health care, as well as the health care in retirement requirements under the 4 labor contracts, as well as the unorganized labor component within the municipal program. And again, each of the contracts are expiring on June 30th of 2012, and each is subject to negotiation for the 12-13 year. Moving on with the retirement, first the school retirement. What I've done here on the performer is to simply show what the pension eligible salaries were for the certified component and put a 2% escalator on what the base number was for the 2012 year. That's looking at about a $230,000 reduction because the rate is going to 12.08% down from 13.23. And we've discussed that in talking about the pension reform. On the non-certified, which would be the teaching assistants, custodial staff, and non-certified, all non-certified, would be increasing substantially by almost 2.82%, going from 8.59 up to 11.41. Again, a 2% adjustment on the base for pension eligible salaries would show about $168,000 increase. Net for the school fund should be in the area of about $62,000 in terms of reduced cost, and obviously that's directly related to what salary base adjustments are necessary to meet the 12-13 contracts. On the municipal side, we're seeing reductions on the school, on the police unit as well as the EMS unit, and again we're seeing a considerable escalation on the MERS system itself, going from 8.59 to the 11.41. Municipal budget will probably see about $115,000 increase in retirement costs if that same 2% adjustment on base salaries were to occur in the final budget. Bottom line, when you take the school pension and the municipal pensions, we'll be seeing about a $53,000 increase between both school and municipal funds. On page 30 of the handout, and I think this is an important page, is that the funded ratio for the MERS system, and this excludes teachers, is 91.8% funded as of June 30 of 2010. So it's less than 9% of an unfunded liability. South Kingstown does not have any private pension plans. All municipal employees are covered through the MERS system, and we are at 91.8% funded as of June 30 of 2010. The next evaluation period will be as of June 30 of 2011. That information won't be available till probably August of next year. So at that point, we'll see where the adjustments have made. Again, the municipal system's 91.8, the EMS is at 145%, and the police are at 87. The target that the state was using is to get to 80% funding. Right now, the teacher system statewide is at about, I believe, 58%. And I think it's 58%, and the state employees is about 58%. And that's why they'll be seeing substantive increases in the cost of pension liability because they've got to get those unfunded ratios up to the 80% level. Fund balance, if we look at the fund balance on page 31, as of June 30, 2011, with the audit that's just being completed now, we'll be showing a undesignated fund balance of about $9.32 million. That is equates to about 12.7% of the 2011-2012 budget. We're forecasting under the current year, the 11-12 budget, about a $450,000 surplus at this time, and that also will adjust as we go through June 30th of next year. Even if we take out the $1.2 million, we'd still have an undesignated fund balance equal to about 11.5% of that 12-13 year budget. So again, we continue to be in strong financial position in both our pension system as well as our funded ratios as far as fund balance is concerned. South Kingstown also prides itself in operating with a number of capital reserve funds, which are used to be able to pay for capital improvements that we bring the money in through the pay-as-you-go budget, and we expend it at the time that the projects are ready to go to market. So at this point, we are not anticipating any major adjustments being required in our programs, yet we believe that we still can continue to provide viable service with a minimal increase in the property tax requirements were the same assumptions used at the time that that budget is released on March 1st. Undesignated fund balance, you can see on this chart, it charts all the way back to 2003, the value of the undesignated fund balance, which was began at about $5.6 million. And at that point, we were below 10% on undesignated fund balance to total operating program. We're now hovering at around 11.5% in the what's predicted for June 30th of 2012. And that's predicated on the $1.2 million being earmarked for the 12-13 year. That concludes my presentation, and I'd certainly be glad to answer any questions now or after the superintendent has an opportunity to do her review.
Thank you, Steve. At this time, I'm just going to open it up here for discussion or questions to Steve or Alan. Jim.
Steve, start on page 16, but before we get there, this entire report, again, excellent, nice work, but this report is telling me that burden on property taxpayers is continuing and increasing. So I'd like to know where you come up with this 2% increase on a property transfer to the school system. Why not a zero? Why not a negative 2%? Why aren't we receiving from your department some options there? So I'd love to know how this decision was made. Is this cast in stone? And
Jim, I've said to you 3 times already tonight. there
I've
is
heard it,
nothing cast
but
in
it's
stone.
when you say it that it
Excuse me.
becomes gold.
Excuse me. I just do want to reiterate that when we did talk about the 2%, Steve did state that it was not necessarily his recommendation, but he was going to be looking at, 1%, 2%, and other options as well. So, Mr. Alpha, did you want to finish your response? Or are you all set?
I'm all set as far as, and again, what I've had to do in terms of preparing a performer is to try to come up with the best information that I can, but also to provide the council with the information of what does a 1%, what does a 2% mean. I could have presented the total amount under the tax cap at 4% as well. What I've tried to do is to present what I think is a reasonable place to begin the discussions. I take direction from the council. If the council directs that they want a zero increase, we'll cut back the services necessary to provide that. But I've got to start off at some place. And that's, I'm sorry if that disappoints you, Jim, but I've got to at least provide you with a starting point. If you want to adjust that starting point, I'd be glad to listen to it.
Well, I certainly hope it's not too late now. I think you should have started at zero, because this entire report tells us of the difficulty of the property owners in this town. And anyone that read today's newspaper with Moody's, just looking at how difficult the state issues are facing us, I think you should have come in with a zero. I'm just nervous here at 2%. It's as though that is what your recommendation is, even though you're throwing it back on the council. I just think you had to start at zero. I just don't know, looking at this report and everything we know about this state, how you could put any increase on this at all.
Dr. Mega.
Just for the record, I didn't hear that as a recommendation. This year, it appears that we're dealing with less variables than preceding years. I didn't hear any discussion, obviously, of things that we have dealt with recently in the past. Examples, supplemental state budgets, obviously from our end, uncertainties over funding formulas. Can we again review the revenue and expense uncertainties as they sit with you right now, beyond obviously the decision about property tax transfer?
I'm not following what you want, Tony.
So in the past, we have talked, as we've gone through this as a process, we speak about variables that are uncertain at the beginning of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And in recent years, those have been quite an extensive list that have made this opening quite murky. For instance, supplemental budgets coming from the state level, issues with funding formulas. As we sit here today and you organize a pro forma budget, those variables seem to be less than what they had been in the past. So am I reading the situation wrong?
No, I don't think that the variables are less. In fact, I think that since personnel takes up over 70% of both budgets, the uncertainty associated with that, I think, is a major problem in budget development.
Mm-hmm.
I think, secondly, the fact that there's greater uncertainty as far as what the state budget is going to look like, because on the school side alone, the existing school budget from the state included the money from the federal government. If that money's not included, it certainly can be asked for by the Department of Education. It needs to be in the governor's budget, and it needs to be accepted through the General Assembly. That's a large dollar amount that would have an impact of about $400,000 on the school budget. The question of the group home aid and how that stays in with another $300,000 is another concern that I would have. I don't think that there's greater certainty. I think the only certainty that I see is that there's less ability for us to gain third-party revenues, and that any increases in either program is going to have a profound impact on the property tax base. That's what everything's pointed to. That's what's happened over the past 3 years. Even with the tax effort increases of 1% per year over the last 3 years, we're seeing that the property tax is becoming a much bigger portion of the overall school/municipal budgets. And I think that, there's greater clarity to the fact that that's going to continue to happen if there's no other funding sources. But I think that, we've got to look at the fact that those factors of not having, the cupboard's bare as far as other sources are
understand that.
concerned. So I think that, I don't think there's greater certainty that we're dealing with here. In fact, I think that there's greater potential for problems than we've seen in the past years, because the recession is taking far longer to resolve itself than had been anticipated. And what it means is that there's less and less flexibility in other funding sources to be able to provide better balance to the budget document as far as the revenue sources are concerned.
I appreciate the clarification.
Carol?
Steve, the 2% that Jim was talking about for the transfer to the school fund, can you tell us, what is that in dollars? Is that the 446? Is that what you're assuming the extra, the difference between last year and this year would be, the 446,000?
It's 960.
964. If you go to page 18,
Where on 18? For the total school program, the difference between last year and this year? In 2000...
on page 18, you see that the transfer for the current year is $48,216,000.
Okay.
And for the 12-13 year, it would increase by $964,327.
Oh, I see it. I'm looking down below where it says the total school program, but I see what you're saying. Okay, so the 2% represents the 900, your assumption that approximately 964,000.
That's correct. And at the same time, if you, when you look to the bottom, you're only seeing a 0.87, but that's because the debt service reduction is being taken into consideration.
Thank you.
Further questions? Jim?
That 900 plus thousand, that 2%, that I assume does not include any of the schools' undesignated fund balance, and if not, is it going to be a quarter or 1/3 of their $2 million that they can add on top of that?
They'll present the performer for the schools. That performer will include undesignated funds being forwarded to their budget. Their presentation, I believe, will show their performer both with a 0 increase on the levy, a 2%, and a 4%, against what they're projecting as an expenditure program. Again, we have not reviewed any of the expenditure proposals that the schools would put together in the performer. What they're doing is the same thing that I'm doing at this point, is saying if we had to take existing service levels and bring those forward one more year, this is what we would end up with as far as a expenditure need. Here's where the revenue would be. And they'll show you, I believe, what the differential would be as far as how much they would be overfunded with 4% and how much they would be underfunded with 0. But I think that's part of their presentation.
Right, but your 2% does not include any portion of the undesignated fund balance?
No, that's just the transfer itself, Jim.
Well, I understand that. I'm just adding up all the numbers. $1 million there, maybe $500,000 or $600,000 from that account. I'm just putting it together before Kristen does her presentation.
Any other further questions or comments before Dr. Stringfellow? does her presentation. Okay, at this time, it's all yours, Dr. Stringfellow.
The second one.
While
That's not
while
it.
Dr. Stringfellow is setting up, may I ask a
Absolutely.
question? So Steve, I just wanted to build a little bit on Tony's question.
I'm sorry?
I just want to build a little bit on Tony's question to you in terms of the variables that we track throughout the process. So you talked about the personnel and the revenue sources. Other things that you also track are things like healthcare and energy and electricity and things like that. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that at this point in the process.
Well, as far as energy is concerned, the school department has a contract, I believe, through October of next year, where their electricity costs are going to be set based on the existing contract that you have. Subsequent to October of next year, the school department does have the opportunity to get into a new energy aggregation program. On the town side, we've just signed a contract for 3 years as of December 1st of this year at 6.71 cents per kilowatt hour. Schools at this point are paying, I think, about 9.9 cents. So for the first few months of the 12-13 year, you're going to have higher cost, and then you should be able to see, even if you do not enter an aggregation program, you could go with the standard offer that's offered through National Grid at about 7 cents. So there should be, on the energy side, for electricity only, for the purchase of the pure energy, not the transmission of the transmission's worth probably another 4 cents per kilowatt. You'll see probably about a 30% reduction in cost for 3/4 of the year. Natural gas prices are also going to be down. So those components are things that that I'm sure John's taking into consideration in terms of the development of his budget. But again, I haven't seen any of the detail for the schools at this point, but I would expect that there should be some savings there.
And on healthcare, the claims on the school side are tracking fairly well compared to, it's still early in the year, and there is a lot of volatility in those claims. They can vary by $200,000 per month, so that obviously has an impact. And earlier in the year, it's tougher to make an accurate projection. But at this stage, claims are tracking well. One of the benefits that we did get was that under the federal health care program, anybody that is a early retiree, we were able, which is age 55 to 65 on the school side, if they have claims over $15,000, the federal government is reimbursing 80% of that. So we were able to get $77,000 for the school department in a revenue source on claims that were over their capped allowance. So that's helped as far as bringing in additional revenue to offset the premium costs. Unfortunately, there's only a $5 billion pool, and they're already up to 4.3. So I don't envision that continuing. Hopefully, we're going to pick up a few more $1,000, but we won't know that until we file the final reports.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you have the clicker, right?
I'm going to make you go fast.
Let's see how. I'll try my best. I timed you. Okay, so thank you so much for inviting us here this evening. What we plan to do is certainly discuss the school committee budget discussion to date. On November 15th, we had a school committee budget work session, and on December 6th, we reviewed the content of this proposed presentation to the town council. We've discussed enrollment, the state of the district, general goals. Next. Tonight, we're going to start off by anchoring you in district student achievement data, the most recent InfoWorks and UCOA data available on demographics, taxing, achievement data, performance classifications, and disaggregation of data. And the first piece that I always offer to you is our change in any of our demographics. Our racial ethnic backgrounds have remained relatively stable. Our eligibility for subsidized lunch programs has increased. We were in 2009, we had 13% of students in South Kingstown eligible for free and reduced lunch. In 2010, it jumped to 16%, and now we're looking at 17% of our youngsters qualifying. Students receiving special education services in the district is actually on a downward trend. In 2009, we were servicing 18% of our students in special education. 2010, 16%, and now district-wide, it's down to 14%. In terms of ELL services, English Language Learner Services, we have always had a very small population of English language learners. We had approximately 16 students in 2010 and now 14 students in 2011 school year. This is a new slide. In the past, you've asked me if we had poverty rate or special education rates that have differed by school, and so I offered to you a breakdown by school. Again, information that is provided on the Rhode Island Department of Education website. You're looking at our highest poverty rate at Broad Rock, which is unusual, quite honestly. Usually you see a higher poverty rate at the elementary level because elementary parents and youngsters tend to be more apt to fill out the forms and bring them into the school department. We're watching Peacedale, Wakefield, and West Kingston have circling around the Title I eligibility piece. Peacedale had always been a Title I eligible school. Wakefield has become recently a Title I eligible school, and Peacedale has been taken off of that status. And so Wakefield and West Kingston are provided additional federal resources to help with their educational needs. Special education rates differ slightly by school. We present, Broad Rock presents as the lowest number of special education youngsters in Wakefield at the highest. Next. This slide is sort of a little bit of a repeat performance in terms of what the town manager has already provided for you, but in the school department, we look at our cohorts, and so last year I was asked to take a look at the how RIDE categorizes property, wealth, and median family income for South Kingstown and for our cohorts, and you see that Portsmouth in our cohort, the pink underlined slide is the highest property wealth district that we compare ourselves to in terms of educational achievement, and MFI is median family income. North Kingstown is the highest median family income as represented in the RIDE data. In terms of high school data, we're looking at some stability in our high school graduation rate as defined by the Rhode Island Department of Education. And so it looked like in about 86% stability for the last 3 years. Remembering that the Department of Education counts youngsters that are still in school and youngsters who are getting their GEDs as dropouts if they have not finished their relationship with the high school in 4 years. Graduation rate at the state is about 76%, so we clearly are servicing more youngsters in terms of graduation than the Rhode Island median population, but we're not satisfied with 86%. Clearly, it would be our goal to make certain that all of our youngsters stayed in school, and we struggle to offer alternative high school options for youngsters who are not best served by the traditional comprehensive high school program. The next slide shows you our grade 11 NECAP data spanning over 4 years. Our math SATs continue to be higher than the state and nation. As for our reading SATs and writing SATs, certainly we would always strive to do better, but we're significantly above the rest of the state of Rhode Island. AP exams is something that was of interest to the council previously. South Kingstown took 107 exams, 67 students took 107 exams, and a 92%, 92 exams scored at the college mastery level, which is 86% of the exams taken, considerably high compared to the level in the state of Rhode Island. This is a new slide asked for at the last school committee session that we will need time to digest as a district, but it was asked, compared to our cohort peers, how do we look in terms of the number of exams taken by South Kingstown students and the number of students that are taking the AP exams. And certainly there are a lot of indicators that are presented in this look. Because you want to be able to compare apples to apples, so you don't know if how many are offered, and how many students score well on the exam. But this is the number of exams that's taken, and significantly we're lower than our cohort peers. In terms of learning and achievement indicators, these are the No Child Left Behind scores, if you will. We are asked to provide elementary target scores, and I know that this is a repeat slide for you, so I won't go into the nitty-gritty details, but the scores actually increased this year, and so it continues to get more challenging to meet the math and English language arts target score. That's not an area we struggle with. What we struggle with is meeting them for youngsters who have disabilities, and for sometimes youngsters who are economically disadvantaged. And so, as you can see by at the elementary level, we have an unmet target in students with disabilities in English language arts. We did not meet adequate yearly progress, and therefore we are in intervention status for year one with regard to No Child Left Behind. I'm certain that the council is aware that the commissioner is asking for some relief to the No Child Left Behind sanctions, and so although that request is pending, it's important that we pay attention to our gap in achievement for students with disabilities at the elementary level and ensure that it increases. At the middle level, we met all of our targets for all students with disabilities, and economically disadvantaged students. And at the high school level, we did not meet adequate yearly progress with our students with disabilities participation rate. And what that means is that although our students with disabilities are scoring at a high enough rate, they're not all taking the test. So we only have 91.1% of youngsters taking the test, where our target is 95%. And certainly youngsters who are educated outside of South Kingstown High School who are members of our community come into play here. And so not every child that we test goes to our high school. This is just a disaggregation key if you're trying to sort of sift through all of my abbreviations, that the key will help you. The general goals of our budget preparation have been certainly creating a pro forma, taking a look at expenditure assumptions, revenue assumptions, pension rates, district FTEs, federal grants, charter enrollments, undesignated funds, pay-as-you-go capital, funding formula, and tracking our state aid trend. And this evening, for the first time in our budget discussion, we're going to present you with some very early data with the Universal Chart of Accounts. Our October statement projects a $534,000 surplus in the current year. We are expecting a smaller turnover allowance estimated because there are certainly fewer staff members eligible to retire than were previously. And as always, all open positions continue to be reviewed to ensure that there is still a current need for a replacement. In terms of expenditure assumptions, we have current collective bargaining agreement terms are noted here. NEASK, which represents our teachers, have a wage freeze for 3 years. Co-pay steps 1 through 3 at 15%, steps 4 through 6 at 17%, steps 7 through 8 at 18%, and steps 9 through 10 at 20%. And there are salary increases in our pro forma for steps only, as is required. SKESP, which represents our clerical staff and our teacher assistants, have a wage freeze for 3 years, co-pay across the board at 15%. And Council 94, which represents our custodial staff and our maintenance staff, has a wage freeze for 3 years with a co-pay of 15%. We projected in the pro forma level staffing with a $250,000 turnover allowance. Formally, it was $300,000, but only 5% of our teachers are even eligible to retire, but certainly may not elect to in this economy. We're looking at a materials allowance that was increased by 3%, but reduced by enrollment as our enrollment is declining. So the actual number that's going into schools is relatively level. We're projecting insurance and utilities cost increase by 5%. Healthcare increased to the working rate by 5%, and adjustments in rates for outside tuitions, which would be special education, out of district placement, Charahoe Vocational Center, and charter schools up by 3%, and the capital plan as submitted, which will be reviewed in January. With regard to revenue assumptions, this is the third year of the funding formula that we're projecting. So we are anticipating a dramatic reduction in the funding formula that we will see each year for 10 years in total. We are also experiencing a slight student enrollment decline. We are estimating, because that's what we're hearing from Carolyn Diaz at RIDE, that we will be that we are expecting Jobs Fund money, approximately $400,000. We also are estimating in our pro forma group home aid. The budget assumption has not been determined, so we have presented pro forma to the school committee at 0%, 2%, and 4%, which would be at the tax cap. Clearly my favorite option, but I'm sure that Mr. O'Neill will agree. Local undesignated fund balance estimated at 25% of the fund balance will be applied as revenue. And Medicaid reimbursement continues to drop, $800,000 2 years ago, projecting now $600,000 approximately in Medicaid reimbursement. This slide depicts our pension trend so that you can see that even with pension reform, we're still anticipating a projection of 12.08% on the certified rate and 11.41% on the non-certified rate. Clearly, these are projections. We've not received any bill from the pension board. They're still working on those numbers, and this is the best available at this time. I have a slide that shows what that looks like. In terms of our district full-time equivalents, you're seeing that from 2006 to last year, negative 74.45 full-time equivalents in the school department. And there's a breakdown for you by level and also an explanation in our footnote with regard to the new Rhode Island evaluation model. I've also been asked to add a slide, I believe it was last year during our session with the town council, as enrollment has been declining over the years, have full-time equivalent staff also been declining. So, enrollment is a very variable rate. So if I pulled enrollment yesterday, if I pulled enrollment on Friday and I pulled enrollment today, we would have a different enrollment. And so what I thought would be more reasonable is to pull enrollment as taken from the Rhode Island Department of Education attendance reports, because members of the community can look up online and see where the attendance rates came from. And so if you're looking at the enrollment as projected on October 1st to October 3rd for 4 years in a row, we're down about 150 youngsters, which is a net change of negative 4.18%. whereas our full-time equivalent staff members in the school department is running at about a negative 9.15%. So clearly, our staff is decreasing as enrollment is decreasing, even more so. And that's tough to do, quite honestly, because if you lose 15 to 20 students in a given year, they're not all coming from one classroom or one school. And so you're not able to say, well, we'll just cut a first grade teacher at Matunic School because we're down 20 students. They could be spread out all over the school department. And so we don't typically see it wrapped up in a nice little bow. I've also been asked by the school committee to talk about the differences in staff and cost and requirements and quite frankly, dramatic changes in education that has occurred in the last 10 years. And this information is also can be seen in greater detail on the Rhode Island Department of Ed website. For students who were graduating from high school in Rhode Island in 2001, they were required to take approximately 20 Carnegie unit credits. And the only requirements at that time were that they take 4 years of English and 4 years of phys ed health. There was no participation needed in state assessments in order to graduate. So whether you participated or not, whether you failed or not, you were still offered the opportunity to graduate. Now in 2011-12, we're looking at the requirements of an advisory period, which costs something because we have to staff that advisory period. Common planning time. Students are completing 2 performance assessments. In our district, they're completing a portfolio and an end-of-course exam. They also have to demonstrate partial proficiency in NECAP math and English language arts, which sometimes requires intervention services and ramp-up programs. And they must be enrolled in an approved diploma system high school, which at this time we certainly are an approved diploma system high school, but there is another commissioner's review in 2012, and we have to continually demonstrate our aggressive urgency at moving youngsters forward and providing supplemental services for all students. We have adopted the Common Core curriculum, and we have to demonstrate that there are multiple pathways for all students. Students have to be able to be in an honors course 1 year, and if they decide that they'd like to be in a typical course the next year, and then an honors course the year after, there has to be a way for them to make choices throughout their educational career. And now instead of having 20 Carnegie units with requirements only in English and in phys ed, there are 4 years of math as a requirement. And students in Rhode Island have struggled with that change and are often taking more math courses and sometimes are in need of intervention services like numeracy and literacy and summer school programs and sometimes doubling up on math or getting an extra scoop in an after-school program, and that all costs money. We also are required to provide, and they're required to pass 3 sciences, 3 social studies, the 4 phys ed. They have a fine arts requirement and a technology requirement, and so our programs have changed. The anticipated outcomes we're already starting to realize in Rhode Island. There has been an improvement in graduation rate statewide, an improvement slightly in NECAP scores, and certainly in the NAEP. But we must close achievement gaps in poverty and special education in order to stay on track with our adequate yearly progress. We must increase rigor and preparation for all students. We must provide common assessment tasks at the high school level, and there's an urgency around continuous improvement. The status quo is just unacceptable. We are starting to explore for youngsters who are struggling credit recovery options. The high school staff is very resourceful in terms of trying to provide support to youngsters who are struggling. And we have to guarantee each and every child a universal access to what they call a guaranteed and viable curriculum. So the curriculum presented in your class is the same as the curriculum presented in your class, and we each have equal opportunity to it. And so what that's meant over the last 10 years is additional staff and programs. A PBGR coordinator at the high school, staff members to support the portfolio programs, SK 101 through 104, literacy and numeracy staff. We have portfolio review days where staff are certainly present and compensated. We have portfolio ramp-up programs, common planning time, local assessments, that had to be created, and they have to be calibrated and anchor scored. We are required to provide response to intervention supports for students, and that requires additional staff. And we're required to have at least 15 hours of professional development annually for all staff members at the high school. PBGR requirements that are state regulation also have an impact on our middle schools. And so in 2001, 10 years ago, there were no requirements for middle schools. Now in middle schools, they were required to have personalized learning focus. We're required to have advisory. We're required to have common planning time, regular and weekly for teams of teachers. We're required to create personal literacy plans for all youngsters that are reading below grade level, and then we're required to provide the staff to ensure the support in literacy so that they become on grade level. We're required to have individual learning plans for each and every youngster, which starts with the creation of a career pathway concept in either 5th or 6th grade and stays with them, with their guidance counselors and their principals and parents and teachers supporting their work until they achieve graduation. Also at the middle level, we're required to provide 15 hours of professional development, RTI, research-based interventions that are staffed, and we're required to have an early warning system no later than 6th grade, which has really brought a plethora of assessments to the doorway of each and every one of our teachers, because we want to ensure early warning earlier than 6th grade, even though it's required at that grade level. And so teachers right now are learning new assessments, and they're juggling to provide those requirements while they're also providing a wonderful instructional program to our students. You've asked for our federal grant numbers. Although these are our numbers for the 11-12 year, we certainly don't know what they are going to be for the 12-13 year. We are hearing through the Rhode Island Department of Education that they may be significantly less than we've seen in the past, but we don't know what they are yet. So they're projected unknown, but we do know that our ERA funds completely disappear, and we were relying quite a bit on the ERA funds to provide a lot of that professional development to our staff members. This is the breakdown of how Title I, II, IV, IDA, and preschool appear to support salaries, benefits, purchase services, supplies and equipment, and capital. Our charter school enrollment has remained stable. In 2010, we had 108 youngsters, 2011, 106. This includes the Green School, which is a high school, which opened on the Alton Jones campus in Exeter, West Greenwich in the fall of 2010. It also includes Kingston Hill and the Compass School. We are very unique in South Kingstown, as you know, to have 2 charter schools in a suburban community. There are certainly in all of the East Bay, with all of the school departments, there isn't a charter school. And most of the other charter schools in Rhode Island are in an urban setting. As you can see earlier, significant increase in charter school enrollments. Opening a full day K in this community has reduced that impact to our schools. In terms of our undesignated fund balance, our undesignated funds as of June 30th, 2011 were $2.3 million. Our estimated surplus is $181,000. We applied $392,000 to operations, and as of now, our unaudited balance looks to be $2.1 million. Bless you. Our pay-as-you-go capital that the town manager has briefly reviewed has increased, although in 2009-10 we were looking for $220,000 worth of projects. Last year with pre-purchasing, we ended up being able to satisfy our pay-as-you-go capital plan with $170,000. And this year, as we'll discuss further, specifically with repair to our track at the Curtis Corner Middle School, we're looking at $290,000. Our state aid trend is trending downward. We're going to continue to have decreases in enrollment, which are not as great as they have been in the last 10 years for the next 10 years, and we're looking over the next 8 years to drop by about $450,000 each year due to the funding formula. So the projection here for state aid is that it's a projection. It includes job fund restoration, but does not include group home aid because the formula changed to not include group home aid. So as the manager already reflected, jobs fund is not a given. It's a projection, and we are anticipating it right now from RIDE. But the funding will swing about $400,000 if we don't receive that money. And group home aid, although it has been in there since the funding formula has been enacted, it's also not a given. And so we're looking about $375,000 in group home. This is a very early projection of the Universal Chart of Accounts data. This is fiscal year 2010 per pupil expenditure data. And so you're seeing, significant change in South Kingstown, where we were one of the highest per pupil expenditure districts. We're now starting to drop. And I would say because of reductions that have been made in the expenditure side. And so you're looking to see that we're always outliers, like New Shoreham, Jamestown, and Little Compton, who have just very small resident average daily membership. But now we're seeing Newport, Central Falls, Foster, Exeter, West Greenwich, and Narragansett are spending more per pupil than we are. And you're noticing that we are just very, very close to the Gloucesters, Charahoe, Johnston, et cetera. And so we're certainly coming more in line with many other districts. The school committee takes great care every year to examine every facet of our budget. It's certainly our intent to find efficiencies, and the COA data is presenting us with more information to be able to get a better look of how we spend compared to the state average. But I really want to caution you that this is early data. It's very hard to compare apples to apples, and I'll give you a couple of examples. But this slide shows you the areas that we spend above average in the state. So in areas like reading, and in areas like library media and music, art, and theater, we get a tremendous bang for that buck because we have absolutely wonderful programs, the pride of our community. And so you want to spend above the state average if you are getting certainly a return on your investment that is above the state average. We are a community that believes that we should have nurses available in our buildings for medically fragile students, and therefore you're going to see that we spend above the state average in nursing. And you're also going to see that there are other school districts in the state of Rhode Island that have made choices that would have part-time nurses available. We have some of these areas are outside of our control, and some are indicated by contractual requirements. So that was asked of me at the last school committee meeting, and I tried my best to highlight for you what I would believe would be hard for us to change, and that would be in red. So charter schools, certainly we want to become more competitive to attract youngsters back from charter schools, but it's a school choice piece that I don't have direct control over. Out-of-district transportation is the same piece. Transportation in and of itself is a challenge in this town because of our geography, and we're the second largest landmass in Rhode Island, and so that's difficult to transport kids around. We have a very interesting makeup, and so the buses can't go everywhere that we need them to go. Workman's compensation, not in our control. Contracted nursing is coming for youngsters who need above and beyond what school departments can provide, not in our control. And we have contractual rates within our contract that dictate payment to professionals outside of the contractual workday. And so this is there for us to be able to use and investigate areas that we may be able to be more efficient in. I'll give you an example with building maintenance. So it might not be fair to say that we pay more for building maintenance and operations than other districts do. So for example, the Woonsocket Public Schools, the town provides their building maintenance. So they would be like a zero in that area. But they may take over something else like the trash removal, and the town doesn't pay for that. And so in our school department, many years ago, we decided that it would be better for the maintenance of our buildings to invest in hiring an electrician, hiring a plumber, and having them on staff, and so that they could know our buildings well. And it's really, it's been a very good return on investment, because our buildings are in terrific shape. And so, you know, that will be an area that we'll be able to drill down to take a look at what other districts are doing to ensure that we're in terrific shape and we're being as efficient as we can be. You know, substitute teachers is another area we're starting to drill down in. Teacher aid support, because certainly we have dramatically reduced teacher aid support in the last 3 to 4 years, but we still come in above average in the state. And you know, our teacher aides are highly proficient professionals who take guided reading groups and work on intervention strategies. And so they certainly provide a very good return on investment. There are other areas where we are, Mr. Alfred, below the state in spending, and some of those are listed here. It's really amazing to me that our unemployment compensation is half that of other of the state average. So we have dramatically reduced our employees in the community in the last 4 years, and so I'm happy to see that they've been able to find work elsewhere. That was a big surprise. Our overtime expenses, you know, our legal services, our debt service. Classroom materials is not something that you want to be below state average in, quite frankly. That shows that we may have been underfunding in that area. Professional development, we've relied a lot on federal funding, and we've relied a lot on ERA funds, which are federal, and so we may have to invest more in our professional development in order to remain competitive and provide students in South Kingstown with the best quality education. Pupil use technology, that's not adult use technology, and software, we spend less than the average in the state. But I think that if you came into our schools, you would say that we spend our money well, because we certainly are able to provide youngsters with good technology projects. And the last part of my presentation tonight is to just give you an update. We haven't talked since our reconfiguration committee gave an update in the spring of 2011. We had several community members and an advisory personnel that sat on a committee formed to explore reconfiguration options, which has been an area that the school committee has struggled with in the last few years. And one of the areas that they discussed is, if you are going to consolidate a school, what are the greatest savings? Because it's really not about the physical facility, energy savings, and maintenance. As if we closed a building, we would need to maintain that building and keep the basic heat and electric function similar to what we've been doing in South Road. It's really about economies of scale and what we call perpetual efficiencies, eliminating staff forever in that building. So eliminating the leadership, a principal, reducing central services in the front office, clerical, custodial, school nurse, teacher, et cetera. Combining very small classrooms and split classrooms in more efficient ways, which would be seen as an economy of scale. And reducing the time for itinerants, which are phys ed, library, art, music, speech language therapist, et cetera, to go from building to building, because certainly we want them teaching in our classrooms with our youngsters, not driving from school to school. And they also discussed the housing aid loss to the town from the state of Rhode Island. If a school were to close. And so you'll see that if Broad Rock closed, it would have been a $2.2 million loss of housing aid to the town. And we talked about transportation costs and first-year expenses of unemployment and moving costs. One of the scenarios that's always the talk in the community, one of the options that was explored deeply with this group is, what would it look like if we closed Curtis Corner Middle School? And certainly there would be an impact on Broad Rock, because all 7th and 8th grade students would be tightly held there. But there would also be an impact on the 4 elementary schools, because now each of the 4 remaining elementary schools would be configured K through 6, with now an all-day K, and with now 6th grade teaming, which would result in certification issues for teachers if housed in an elementary setting. So this chart sort of gives you, and all of this information has been available for months on our website, and in the following slide, I'll give you the link. But there's so many more notes. Every meeting was public. All the notes were available. Community members worked very hard on this. So they took a look at the actual rooms that we'd need based on enrollment projected for this year and the following years, and then how many we have at maximum, because at Matunic we have an ALP program, an alternative learning program, and at West Kingston we have our English language learner program, and at Wakefield and Peacedale, although we have a district program at Peacedale, it's incorporated in one of those 26 rooms. And what the ramifications would be is, if you do the math between based on enrollment need and what we have room for, we don't have room to put them in 4 elementary schools. And if we did, even let's pretend it in many years, if we had room, then you'd be looking at music on a cart, art on a cart in each of our 4 schools. No room or questionable room for speech language therapy and special education services. And OT, which is occupational therapy, would need to be on the stage in the cafeteria in Wakefield with a curtain, but at Peacedale, clearly no room for them at all. So that was abandoned as an option for our community by the team. The other piece was, okay, let's pretend that we don't have 4 elementary schools. Let's have 5 and make South Road the 5th K through 6 school. And as I indicated earlier, the Rhode Island educational requirements and mandates are not the same as they were in the past. In closing Curtis Corner Middle School, you would lose $583,000 in housing aid, and we currently receive no housing aid for South Road School. Even if we brought South Road School back online, we would have to reapply for housing aid, and it's uncertain if we would be eligible. In taking one school offline and bringing another school online, now you have no savings in leadership, because you would be reducing leadership at Curtis Corner, but you'd have to increase leadership at Peacedale to accommodate all of the children that you were sending there, and you would have to increase at South Road. There wouldn't be savings in terms of school nurse teacher, because the school nurse teacher from Curtis Corner would move to South Road, clerical would move to South Road, and the custodial, although it's not the same square footage at Curtis Corner than at South Road, but you'd now be using more space at each of the other elementary buildings that now are not having foot traffic and students in them every minute of the day. There would be cost for more travel time for the itinerants, less efficiencies in the classrooms, and adding more split classes. It would probably cost us more in terms of transportation, because we have a 2-tier busing system, and we have 40 buses in our fleet. So it's unlikely that those 40 buses could service an entire additional elementary school with a K through 6 configuration, because right now the 40 buses are moving youngsters in grades 5 through 12 with 40 buses and K through 4 with 40 buses. Because remember, at kindergarten and 1st grade, we have a tighter walkability. We would also, at everywhere except Peacedale, only have a capacity of 2 sections per grade level in the 4 schools. So what ends up happening is, instead of having economies of scale, you have the reverse, which is a diseconomy of scale, and we would be forced into what I would call very small slice redistricting. So you would have youngsters who were in this very small section, and the next street over would go to another school. And on the other side of the slice of pie, they would go to another school. Clearly was not something that was talked about with a lot of passion and enthusiasm by the community members that were on the RAC committee. So they determined that reconfiguration savings with closing one school would disappear if there was a need to open another school. So the RAC committee recommendations were all public meetings posted on the SK Schools website. They had many, many, many options and scenarios for reconfiguration that were explored, and their ultimate recommendation was to transfer the preschool students to Peacedale Elementary School, and that's being explored for September 2012 by the school committee. In terms of the pro forma, what we projected is pro forma at 0% property tax transfer would leave us to cut programs and staff by about $1.2 million. At 2%, we would still have to cut programs and staff by $284,000. And at 4%, which would be the maximum allowed under the tax cap, we would benefit from $679,000 and no need to cut. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. So, I'm going to open it here at the table for questions and comments. Carol?
Kristen, those numbers that you just gave us, they're not in the document?
They aren't. They were not something that the school committee asked me to include.
Could you repeat those for me?
At 0% property tax transfer, we would need to cut approximately $1,249,000. And at 2%, we would need to cut approximately $284,000.
Okay.
And at 4%, which would be the highest afforded option under law, we would not have to cut anything. We would be receiving $679,000 in additional resources.
Thank you.
Sure.
I just have a few questions. You talked about offering alternative options for high school students that are possibly thinking about dropping out. Could you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Certainly.
And then also, if you could include in the dialogue, I know that there was a grant that I think the high school did not get on virtual learning, because I think that's really an important component for the future education of the kids.
I agree. The high school principal, John Rashat, John Bellata, and I attended a recent conference on alternative programs involving virtual learning and ramp-up programs and being able to extend our reach to youngsters that are not being successful in the comprehensive high school. A lot of the work of the RAC committee, the Reconfiguration Advisory Committee, looked at the data on alternative programs. And we struggled with how do you really provide space for an alternative program when the high school is using every available room, and we have teachers in the high school who are moving from room to room and don't have a space that they can call their own. And so Hazard School, as we had indicated earlier in the NESDEC reports, is not necessarily an optimal space for early learning, especially having youngsters on the second floor and housing our alternative high school special education program on the first floor. And so youngsters at Hazard are having to either go on the elevator or walk up and down the stairs to get to to the basement where their occupational therapy services are held. And so there was a lot of conversation at the RAC committee, and for those in the community, all of the minutes and the information that was shared is on our website. So the thinking was that as a savings, if the preschool moved to Peacedale, that the alternative high school environment could grow at Hazard, and that there could be opportunities for grants, competitive grant funding. The high school did apply for a grant, and unfortunately, they were not awarded that grant. But we also have another grant that Bob McCarthy and I are attending a request for proposal session in early February because Commissioner Gist is awarding one competitive grant in the state of Rhode Island for about $500,000 worth of technology in some sort of an alternative setting. And so certainly if we had that type of investment, we might be able to grow a program of substance very quickly for credit recovery. And so what you look for in an alternative high school is a time differential. Sometimes youngsters quit school because they have to work. Sometimes they quit school because their I guess clock doesn't really start until 10 o'clock in the morning, and that's when they could really achieve their best learning. And so you would provide some flexibility of scheduling. You would provide some time for them to either come in and work at school, to have their foot in a comprehensive high school, or to be able to do some of their work from home. And that's what alternative learning is looking like throughout the nation.
Thank you. If I can just further elaborate, is there any more or a better working relationship or bridge building to work with the Education Exchange?
Well, it's interesting because I think that we're working more with the Education Exchange every day. I know that youngsters used to be able to drop out of high school at 16 years of age, and now the legislators have changed that to 18 years of age, but they have to present a plan to the guidance department, to the high school principal, and then to myself. It's been one of the most awkward situations I've ever really been in educationally, quite frankly. To give someone permission to drop out of school just doesn't sit well with me. So I really I scrutinize that quite rigorously, and each of the youngsters who has presented in front of me has provided some sort of a plan through the Education Exchange, that they're going to get their GED, that they're providing them support in classes, that they're giving them an assessment so that they can gauge how predictable it would be for them to pass the GET at this point. So we found ourselves a nice little partnership with them recently.
Great, the close proximity with their move is great to the high school. Jim?
Kristen, couple things always with numbers. Really quite amazed here at the poverty rate by school. You talked about Broad Rock at 20% level, but then the special ed 11%. How do you?
Well, I think it's interesting because Broad Rock is where our youngsters from throughout the district for the first time come together. And so you're able to see, I mean, clearly it's shocking to me that youngsters are presenting with a poverty rate that high at that age level. So it would say to me that the staff at Broad Rock is probably doing a very good job identifying need and asking families to afford themselves some assistance. But that was interesting. In terms of special education rates, I think our elementary schools do a really, really good job providing the support that's needed to our youngsters and bringing up their reading rates and their math rates so that when they get to Broad Rock, they're not necessarily eligible for special education. You're also seeing the impact of RTI, which is the response to intervention. And RTI was started at the elementary level and is just beginning to blossom at the middle high school level. So if I was a projection that would interest me is to say in about 2 years, I bet we're going to see significantly different rates of special education at our middle school and high schools going forward.
Yeah, and along those lines, I wish I could measure dollar-wise. I remember sitting here with Dr. Hicks when I asked him about some special ed programs, and to quote him, he said, "We're a little loose, with our IEP designations." And at that time, we're somewhere in the 23-25% of the population. So this is a phenomenal improvement, but can I measure this in terms of dollar improvement of operating expenses on your budget?
I mean, yes.
I should be saving millions of dollars. If I'm looking at these percentages,
So you're seeing us take a look and dramatically decreasing staff. And dramatically decreasing staff is going to have an extraordinary impact on our budget. So you can absolutely track it in that regard. You can also track it through our federal funding. So you're seeing that if federal funding has stayed stable over the last 3 or 4 years, and we're carrying those salaries in some of our federal budgets, then you're not going to be carrying them in our operations budget.
yeah, I just have no way of measuring the dollar savings there. A couple other questions. I know in your 2012-13 pro forma budget, page, I don't know what page number it is here, but October statement, you projected $534,000 of a surplus, and then later on, under the undesignated accounts, you were using, well, it was 10, 11, 181,000, so I can't figure it out. Let's see, a couple of things here. Can you give me a number of the, what you project for the 12-13 year for the salary and benefit increases on your STEP, those who are in the STEP employment?
Jim, that page I gave you, I just had Andy hand out, is a copy of the school department's pro forma, which shows the salaries with, right after the blue bar, it shows the expense statement. But you've got the salaries going from 34.5 million, and then it's showing under the pro forma 34.79.
So what's that telling me, though, for the step increases? You know, the average about 8%?
Estimating about 285 to 300,000.
So the total package, salary and benefits?
STEP,
All right, so just pure salary then?
correct.
Okay. All right, so 285, okay, all right, I've got to figure that all out, but a
Because
couple...
82% of our teachers are at top step.
How many?
82%.
82. Gosh, you were 2/3 last year, weren't you, or the year before? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, we were very close to that.
I got the slide here.
82%.
John's pulling up the slide from last year.
No, I got
Oh,
this year's.
this year.
God, I've got that back at the office. Anyway, you know, I always had you at 2/3, 1/3. Couple of things that,
Jim, we found the slide on steps. We have 3.93% teachers are in steps 1 through 3. 6.46% teachers on steps 4 through 6. 7.58% of our teachers are in steps 7 through 9, and 82% of our teachers, or 292 teachers, are at step 10. We have 356 teachers in all.
okay, thank you. All right, just a couple more house cleaning here. The stimulus that came down from the government last year, 400,000 or 500,000, what do we have? And that's being lost in the 12-13 year. How are you accounting for that money or loss of money with this new budget? I know you've told me you had 3
Right.
different projections.
So the stimulus money is not in our operational budget. The stimulus money goes into our federal grants, our consolidated resource plan. And
Okay.
so what you're seeing is a loss of ERA funds and SFSF funds.
All right, that's the
They're-
ERA fund, okay. All right, thank you. A couple of things which I really wish you'd be a little bit more fair about.
Let me just make sure that we clarify that. You've got federal job funds in the current year of $420,000 that are stimulus dollars that were federal dollars that came in. Those will not be available next year. The question that I raised earlier was whether the school department at the state level will provide all of the 37 school districts with a replacement with state dollars for those federal dollars, because those are in the school fund. So it's a $420,000, $420,000 in federal stimulus dollars that are in current year that would have to be replaced with state dollars next year, Jim.
In your budgets, then, are you assuming that that will be replaced, or are you leaving that at a zero? So you are assuming that will be replaced?
Yeah, that performer sheet that we handed out to you just a couple
Well, we
of
just
minutes
got
ago.
that. Oh, okay.
If you
okay.
take a look at that, Jim, it shows the, both the group homemade staying at the 375 and the federal funds of the 427,000.
Okay.
Again, those wouldn't be federal funds next year, but they would have to be state funds if they were replaced through the state budget.
Right. But that's at risk, but we're assuming that it's going to be replaced. On your enrollment versus your full-time equivalents, a decline, you know, part of my issues have always been, and I think a lot of folks in town, it was the opening of Broad Rock, and I'm not getting into whether it should have been open or not, but that seems to be the peak of the population. If you go back, even your numbers, your first years, Kristen, you were superintendent, you put the 4,383 students in that 0001 year pre-Broad Rock, and we had 519, that's in all the paperwork, of staff. So basically, when you look at it, our enrollment has dropped 22%, and our FTEs are really up 4 to 5% if you measure it over 10 years. Now, you have to measure that against a decrease of populations. You had a delay with the decrease of populations, but I think that's a much more fair...
And you certainly have to take into account the fact that many of our increases to staff are prescribed by mandates from the state. And the education has significantly changed in 10 years. And much like the town manager takes a look at 4 years' worth of data, that's what you're looking in terms of recency of school data.
Yeah, I know, and I can partially agree with that, but I mean, the numbers are really out of place here, just to look for the last 5 years. And then lastly, the issue with closing Curtis Corner School, opening South Road, I guess I couldn't disagree with you more, or the RAC committee. First of all, I can't believe there wouldn't be huge transportation savings, especially with a lot more kids walking to school with our 5 elementaries. Frankly, that's why most people moved to this town, was the neighborhood elementary schools. And using the current numbers you have in place here, we've got 1,700, a little over 1,700 kids right now into 1,990 spaces at those 5 schools for a K through 6. So I'm really a believer in this healthy design. I think you'd save hundreds of thousands of transportation costs. And the other thing I'd like to also tell you, the last numbers I had on the housing aid, and I heard it from your RAC committee last year, and I'm seeing it written down here again, 583,000 on the last page, the second paragraph down the left. The last numbers I had was about 6 years of bonding with about 360,000 and 10 years on the remaining 200,000. So that's roughly 80,000 a year. Am I wrong on that, or is this number so out of place that was unfair to use it with both the RAC committee as well as in this program?
So the first thing that you talked about is in terms of transportation, and I tried to describe for you that if right now we are busing, we have 2 tiers, which is an exceptionally efficient method of busing, especially for such a large geographic community. So in 2 tiers of busing, we're using the same buses to pick up youngsters on the first run, which is our 5 through 12 run, and then they're going back and circling through neighborhoods and picking up youngsters who have a shorter walkability distance, especially in kindergarten and first grade, and they're transporting them with those same 40 buses. So it's very, very efficient. When you take that first tier, the buses that are right out of the barn in the morning, and you're dropping out the 5th and 6th grade youngsters from that equation, and now you're only busing 7 through 12 youngsters, then you don't have enough buses to pick up all the elementary kids. So you drop off buses on tier 1, you significantly add buses on tier 2. And from our early calculations, there are not savings, we would anticipate that there would be costs. There aren't many youngsters in our community that can walk to the 5 neighborhood elementary schools. So, and I think that you have to keep in mind the fact that, you know, we provide practically a door-to-door transportation for very young children because we don't have a lot of sidewalks in neighborhoods near our schools. In terms of the spaces, when you quote numbers that say we have this many kids and this many slots, I don't think that you're fairly taking into consideration the notion of redistricting. So kids in neighborhoods aren't distributed in perfect little pockets to say that in every single house there will be 2 kids or 3 kids, and they'll go to, you know, 2nd grade and 3rd grade. In order to slice up a redistricting, and I've redistricted in several school departments, so it doesn't come out in nice little packages. Usually, the greater your redistricting option, the more economies of scale that you'd have. The smaller the slice, now you're all of a sudden having to put in more split sections. A good example is at Broad Rock. When we moved 5th grade to the Broad Rock, we eliminated some splits because we were able to combine small sections that would have been splits in the elementaries into one classroom, warranting one teacher. In terms of the housing aid numbers, we got them directly from Alan, and Alan provided that directly to the Reconfiguration Advisement Committee. They are up to date as of spring 2011.
So that's an annual number, the
It's
583?
not an annual number.
Pardon?
It's not an annual number.
Well, that's what I just said. Some of that is payable over 6 years, some over 10, so.
That's the total loss in housing aid.
Yeah, but that's over, you should have put in there over a certain period of
It's
time.
almost impossible to put it in like that because there are so many different bonded projects in all of our schools that I mean, I don't want to speak for Alan, but to be able to give us a total number, to be able to do that by year, by school would be a Herculean feat.
Well, I know we have those numbers, and, but again, I know that was a number that was thrown out last spring when the meeting I went to at the high school cafeteria, and that frightened everybody like that would be the cost of next year if we had
We
changed
were
the
very
school.
clear with folks on the Reconfiguration Advisement Committee that that would not be an annual number.
Yeah.
That would be total loss.
Okay. All right, well, then you and I totally disagree on this, and I'd really love to, I wish we could put through a real expense cost ratio on closing Curtis Corner. But it's just crazy here. We keep losing kids, and I know I've written plenty of articles talking about, obviously, it'll be class differentials. We know everything's not perfect with even numbers in there, but it seems to me that there's plenty of room here. And if you look at all the numbers of K through 6, they're all, you know, averaging 245 kids per, so Broad Rock would be very safe for 7th and 8th grade for certainly the next half dozen years.
Where would the savings come from, though, Jim? Because we've had this discussion several times, and we've been very transparent about where savings would come from if they close the school. The savings are going to come from staff. They're going to come from leadership. They're going to come from nurses, front office staff, itinerants being able to be more efficient, classes being able to be more efficient. And so I struggle with your disagreement in this area because I just don't know where you're seeing the savings come from.
Well, I think they're there, and I think you're going to have to make some priority decisions. I just think this economy, what Mr. Alfred talked about earlier, what was said by Moody's today, I think you're really on dangerous ice, and I'm also really worried about the General Assembly, what they're going to do and what GIS's office is going to do. And I think you've got to be worried about that. And also, too, that this other snapshot you gave in here of per student spending. I mean, everybody but Newport, these are all small towns, your Little Comptons, New Shoreham, Narragansett, it's only 1,400 kids. That's really not a fair comparison. Only Newport is, and we know why they have the amount of money that they have. But our cohorts in there, the North Kingstown and Barrington, under 13,000 per student, they're not even in your graph.
And I think that it's fair to say that that's an area that this district has struggled in for decades. And I think that you have to also look at the return on investment you get for your money in this district. We are outperforming a lot of these districts, and proudly so. Our teachers work very hard with the little materials that they have in front of them, and our youngsters are benefiting from a quality education system, one that I would not want to see decline.
Well, I don't think that's the case. If you've got excellent staff, I don't think that's even part of your equation. But I think you've really got to take a look at the ratio of classrooms to pupils and where the decline has been the last decade. And I don't think you're being fair with the taxpayers. Our property taxpayers in this town are tremendous when you think about them. People are hurting. Matter of fact, the reason we don't have a lot of families moving in here is because of that property tax. And you heard Steve earlier. What did we jump, 83, 88%, or whatever the numbers were? We keep going up, but the demands from those who pay the property taxes. And how many of them have any equity left in their home? And that never seems to be a discussion with the 7 of you.
I don't think that's fair to say. I
Oh.
think that the 7 school committee members have worked very, very hard, at least I can speak to under my tenure, to be very, very careful with the taxpayers' money and be very considerate of how we're spending that. We've been very appreciative of the support given to us by the town council, and I think that we've made some dramatic cuts, and you get to a point where there's very little more to cut without dramatically impacting core educational programs.
Well, I guess we respectfully disagree. Thank you, Ella.
Kristen, if I could just piggyback on some of the comments here. Do we have any data, and if we don't, it's not necessary to provide tonight, but students moving into the district? Because I think that the school system is one of the draws for people moving into our district.
We have, usually I thought I put a slide in about mobility. We have a pretty stable mobility rate. So we're looking at usually a very small number of youngsters moving in or moving out. But yes, we certainly, we're a system that people would want to move to.
I just have a few questions. And again, if the answers are not here at the fingertips, it's something that you can always email us.
Thank you.
Do we have, you talked about possible, people that are eligible to retire. Do we have a number figure on that? Actually, how many teachers and a proposed dollar amount for the savings that it could generate with attrition, for the attrition?
It's in the low teens. We have investigated it. With the change in the retirement eligibility, we need to make sure we fully understand what that impact will have, but we can certainly email that to you. In terms of proposed dollars that you recoup, we're not seeing that much recoupment, quite honestly. We budget for a median step teacher. We don't necessarily draw the lower step teachers as much as we draw people who have a vast amount of experience.
And then I was wondering, the number of children out of district, do we have a total amount of the number of children?
We do. I can email that to you. That was requested. 21. I don't need to.
21. So that number is down as well. I think at one point it was 31, so that's down.
It is down.
Ella, one of the points that I think also needs to be looked at is, when we look at cost per pupil, is it not correct that we are an outlier as far as dealing with charter schools
That's correct.
for the suburban communities?
And we're an outlier in transportation.
So the numbers, and I just put them up on the board, I had asked earlier in my discussions with the school superintendent of what the tuition costs were going to be next year. That'll be a component of the budget. What we're looking at is forecasting at 110 kids that will have a budgeted amount of $1.3 million. Now, if that $1.3 million is added into the cost per pupil that you're showing for the 3,400. So with quick math, that adds almost $345 to the per pupil cost if you go back the 2 years of what you were showing in the UCOLA slide that you had. My point is that you have to look at the cost per pupil as a broad brush, because there are specific costs that are associated, that are unique to our system as a suburban community, if we're going to compare against the North Kingstown, to what our cost per pupil is going to be, that make us different, whether it's the charter schools in this case or the tuitioned-in students
Jamestown.
going into North Kingstown that are providing additional support dollars that actually reduces their cost per pupil based on those kids coming in from Jamestown. So I get concerned when I see some of these numbers because we are not really providing a valid basis for comparison, and that's one of the concerns I've had with UCOLA right along, is that what we're trying to do is to put everybody into a standardized box, and until you drill down into what those costs are, you really don't know whether it's a valid comparison. And you know, the charter schools is a classic illustration of that concern.
That's a good point, thank you.
I don't know who's first, Maureen or Tony, so I'll let you duke it out.
Well, I wasn't sure if you were finished, but I just
Alan
wanted to make
also.
a,
We got one more thing with Alan,
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to get back to the debt service comments, because I did put those spreadsheets together. I have had a break in the network, so I can't get into the spreadsheet, but those numbers I did put together for the school department, and it was last fall that they were asked, so they were put together. So I don't know, you know, what year is the base year, so there could be a couple of years that are going to drop off that 583, but at the same time, all the other schools are going to have reductions in their debt service costs too. But certainly I can go back and revisit that and update it and let you folks know what the new numbers are as of 12/13.
Thank you, Alan. Back to Maureen.
Well, I just wanted to make a general comment about our budget, and certainly in fairness to the superintendent. You know, the school committee asked her to present a pro forma budget. We asked for a range of options in terms of what it would look like with different percentages. We asked for best case scenario, and we asked for worst case scenario. I think the superintendent and director of finance certainly did good work with the information that they presented this evening. Certainly the school committee is just working with the information that they have right at the moment. Our next steps will be workshops coming up in January, at which time we'll be talking about, well, which programs are satisfying our needs, what programs are providing the evidence of good student achievement, and what programs do we need to invest in this year, and what is the cost going to be, and we certainly are aware of the environment.
Thank you, Tony.
I also want to express my appreciation for the superintendent on walking us through some of the salient points that she made. Yeah, I really do want to speak to the community about the complexity of education and change. And, you know, I had the opportunity, I grabbed my 2001 cell phone just to give an illustration of this context of per pupil expense over time, societal expectations, educational expectations, community expectations, and mandates that just you just can't make relevant comparisons over a decade of time without accounting for variables other than numbers such as pupils and dollars spent. And so I really think that the superintendent try to give the community some insight into that as an educational leader. She has a greater understanding of this in her staff than certainly I think anyone else that is sitting at these tables. I also wanted to, you know, I like to always go back to not just monetary data, but achievement data. And it's all there. You can always find the data of the South Kingstown Junior High School back in '99 and 2000. Some of my colleagues were sitting at the school committee table, and I'm sure wrestling with concerns such as when you looked at our writing data, 54% were below proficient at the middle school. When you looked at our problem-solving data in mathematics, we found that 44% were below proficient. And we looked at our most recent proficiency data, and we noted that we've made some great strides. But there is something that I think we need to really start holding our own feet to the fire about. That graduation rate is just not acceptable. in a suburban district such as South Kingstown. It has, it has been something that we have just really not moved recently, and I really think that it's a striking piece of data to me that we really have to really put our arms around why. And I know it said 86% graduation rate. Some of those students go on to extra years of school and do ultimately graduate. But I still think we're right about 8 or 9% of students not graduating. Many of those, a high percentage of those being boys and girls, and how we are failing young men at the high school level. And what we need to do to think about alternative ways to educate, because those individuals end up often being in that 9% of the unemployed. And I am really disappointed in ourselves that over the years that we haven't been able to look at this and come up with solutions. I appreciate the fact that the current superintendent shares the same concerns, and I know the past superintendent did too, and it's certainly an area that we need to continue to work on.
Thank you. I can't express an interest in that enough, Tone. That is definitely something that's been dear and near to my heart for years. We actually got together a committee several years ago, School to Career, looking at some of those potential students that were, looking at dropping out and trying to connect them to a business to keep the interest there. So when I asked, before about that alternative learning program, I was really looking for possibly creating some type of an alternative learning program once you do have hazard, that maybe it could be, creating revenue for the district, for surrounding districts to send their kids. And I know that the virtual program is definitely something that's, it has to happen. Has to happen.
I think that you make a very good point. Usually in alternative high schools, there is a community connection because some of the research will say, well, are they not having FaceTime with teachers and other cohort members? So that you have to build in some sort of community connection. And that could look like a school to career sort of pathway, or it could look like a volunteer service learning pathway. And, I agree with you. If we created a competitive alternative high school in the southern region, we might be able to attract revenue from other places. We certainly struggle to place youngsters in alternative settings, and so I know we're not unique in that regard.
And you could possibly have children graduating in less than 4 years, moving on to bigger and better things with our university right here in town.
Yes.
So, Carol, and then Kathy.
Kristen, as far as the preschool kids, are we required to bus them to school?
Our special education youngsters in preschool were required to transport.
But not all of the students that go to the hazard?
Not the youngsters who are our typical community students.
And as far as the recommendation transfer the preschool students to Peacedale is being explored in September 2012, do we have any numbers as to what the cost savings would be in doing that?
When the RAC committee originally investigated it, depending upon variables in terms of will there still need to be a program coordinator for preschool? Will we still need to have the nursing coverage that we have? Would youngsters be redistricted out of Peacedale to the other communities? Those variables, it would be somewhere between $50,000 to $200,000 in savings we're estimating.
So I guess it has to be, you have to weigh that to see if the option's even worth it to, stop moving everybody around again. We seem to have done that a few years in a row now, and maybe people would like to see some stability with where they're going next year. So I'm just cautious if we're not going to save a lot of money.
I agree.
Kathy?
Kristen, it was the second phase of the Race to the Top money last week. Deborah Gist got, I'm not exactly sure of the sum, and I was a little busy this weekend catching up with the holiday stuff, but are we going to see any of that money?
So we were just copied in on that information. early on in the Race to the Top process, early learning grants are very exciting to me. I think that if you invest in our youngest learners and provide them with good quality preschool, that you are going to be generating higher achieving youngsters and youngsters who will be less at risk and less costly, quite frankly, to us in the long run. So when I originally talked about, can we put our hat in the ring for a competitive grant in early learning, it was going to be only open to urban communities at that time. I have just downloaded this thick details of what we were just awarded, and depending on how quickly we get out of here tonight, I might just read that document and have some more information to you, very soon. It's my hope that there will be an opportunity for suburbans. Since I arrived in this lovely community, I've had my eye on South Road School and the opportunity to bring a universal preschool. And so if there is an opportunity to bring in revenue and get it grant funded, I will be quick to bring that to the school committee's attention.
I hope so, because it was a significant amount of money. I mean, kudos to her. I mean, I think it was Rhode Island was one of only 6 states that made the second time funding, I guess,
Yes.
for the Race to the Top. So, I mean, it really is kudos to her, but it would be nice if it wasn't, seems like a lot is going to the urban area,
Right.
and maybe my nose is a little out of joint, but I just don't want to see us slide to be at that level of what the urban numbers are, and then it's a race to try to catch up again, so it defeats the whole purpose all
You're
around,
absolutely
so. All right, well, thank you. Be interesting to know if we do get any. Please let us know, too.
I will.
Thank you.
I have a question, and it's going to bring back some memories for people who have been on the school committee for a while. I can remember being at URI in one of their conference rooms, and Cliff Katz mentioning looking at revenues and not being able to rely on the department, the state for educational funding, and possibly creating other ways of generating income so that we're not slowly relying on the state for our educational purposes. And several suggestions were, mentioned, and it's probably been 8 or 9 years since that time. And then I reflect back at another meeting where I believe Dr. Mega had stated that some people in our community may have an ability to pay more. And I don't know if that was going down a path that to add to our South Kingstown Educational Foundation that does such great work, giving out grants to teachers, but opening up other doors and other opportunities for possible receiving donations, from the community, in memory of maybe someone that has passed, or has that been a discussion? And Tony, if you could, or Kristen, somebody could elaborate on the ability for the community, some people in the community, to pay more.
I know that we have a wonderful partner in SCEF. We have a wonderful partner in CARES. In the last year, we have given employees throughout the district an option of payroll deduction to a variety of different foundations, and now they have a choice to be able to contribute to SCEF and to CARES. I don't know what the reach out is from those communities to the greater population to be able to give donations. But I do know that our school department employees, specifically Doug Snow, Lynn Doherty, and Terry Lynch, have been working very closely with SCEF on exploring some sort of a larger campaign. And so they've been at meetings really investigating that, I would say, for a little over a year now. But I'm not ready to forward discrete details to you at this time, but I haven't personally heard about receiving donations in someone's memory, which I think is a nice idea.
Any other questions here at the table? Well, I'm just astounded at both presentations. I think this is probably the best presentations that I've ever sat here at this table, and as well as being, serving on the school committee for 8 years. So Many, many thanks go out to Stephen Allen for putting such an elaborate, and Dr. Stringfellow and John Rashat, an elaborate presentation. And this is step number 1 in a process that's going to continue for quite some time. So at this time, if there's no other further comments, questions here, I'm going to open up the microphone to the public.
Wouldn't let you off that easy. Jonathan Daly LaBelle. I just wanted to ask about I just had a question and a comment. The undesignated funds, which is in the school package, which is, I believe is stating 2.14 million surplus, that's going into the current year that we were in?
When you say going into the current year?
That's for the current, that's what exists at this time?
Revenue. Yes.
Is that the fund balance?
Yep, that's the fund balance.
Okay, so, and then you're,
Pull up that slide.
and then, all right.
So we have undesignated funds from June 30th, 2011. The balance was 2.3 million, and the unaudited balance now is 2.1.
Okay. Is there a reason why that's not audited at this time?
It's completing now. We haven't gotten an official audit yet.
Okay.
We should get the final report in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, and then the current surplus is in that $500,000 to $550,000 range for the current year?
10, 11.
For this year, for 11-12. There's a surplus right now, or
Yes.
n-
Hold on.
in October,
So
as of
our
October?
it's about 500,000, but our October projections were 534.
Okay, so I know that, I go to these meetings enough, I know that can change. But if that does roll forward, there potentially is additional money that can be tapped, that could reduce the amount of tax levy increase.
Sure. I mean, we certainly, 500,000 is not a lot. And so if 1 or 2 youngsters with special needs move into our community and require extra support or an out-of-district placement or a bus, you could eat into almost all of it. If we all of a sudden have some sort of another repair or need, then you can eat into a lot of the operations. But if we trended, what are you showing me?
No, I'm just showing you, I think what Jonathan's asking is, are we going to use any in the coming year's budget?
Yeah, I'm just looking and saying if it's, $500,000, if that were to hold, using that 25%, it would be, whatever, 125,000 or so that could be used to fund the program and make it so that, the taxpayers don't have to come up with quite as much.
It could be.
Okay. All right, I just wanted, I was looking at that, the poverty.
I do want to clarify that.
All right.
You can't increase your undesignated fund balance so that you don't have the same amounts the following year. So you've got to be careful where you're not going to put all your eggs into one basket, because if you use it all in one year and you've got an outflow that's larger than the continuing surpluses, then you eat into what your fund balance is, and eventually you're at a point where then you've got to be able to maintain service levels, you'd have to have a jump in the property tax. So any of the undesignated fund use has got to be carefully looked at, and we do not look at fund balance being available until after it's audited.
Okay.
So we're not going...
I was really just thinking in terms of percentage. I wasn't thinking in terms of...
Okay, but when I hear 125,000 is available
Okay.
of 550 that may be available, I've got to stop and say at that point, that's not something I'd be supportive of.
All right.
Because until it's part of the 2.1 million, it's not available for them to even look at.
All right, I'm just thinking in terms of trying to take some of the pressure off the property taxpayer, and, come April, May, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm trying to protect the taxpayer too.
I appreciate that, but April, May, it starts to look pretty solid, would be my perspective. The school year's almost over. But, I was just looking at the poverty rate, and, I hear, Mr. O'Neill's concerns, and, I think, we're in the same business, and, sometimes we see, we're out with people, and we're out with people in their houses, and, we go on multiple listing, and we see these foreclosed properties, and, this is where people used to live, and now they're not there anymore. you know, and a lot of the sales are distressed sales. And, you know, we can see, you know, maybe, I mean, I'm not, you know, but I'm just saying where, I won't speak, I'm not trying to speak for Mr. O'Neill. I'll just say, you know, sometimes I look and say, you can see on a more personal level, you know, kind of the responsibility that's falling to people. So, yeah, I guess I just want to acknowledge it is tough, and I think that, you know, you do want to look at every dollar. And I'm not saying that that's not looked at, but just to kind of acknowledge it, I think that's where some of that comes from, because what I see on a day-to-day basis, you know, in South Kingstown, it's nothing compared to other areas. I'm not saying that, but you still see it in a more real way that you want to look. Now, the other side of the coin, and I think that this has been touched on in a couple comments of the tables here, is, you know, these people who are struggling, the people that are struggling the most, would benefit the most by having a stable district and having the stable programs and having this quality of education. So the supports that are there, you know, really most help the people who are also, you know, the hardest hit. So it is kind of a double-sided coin, and I know that my friend, Mr. O'Neill, you know, has touched on that in the past, so I'm not saying, you know, but I guess I just want to say, I just want to bring that out in a way that makes sense to me, and hopefully it makes sense to others. Thank you.
Further comments? I'm going to bring it back to the table. Any lasting comments, questions? Well, at that time, I would just like to wish everyone a very, very happy holiday. Merry Christmas, whichever holiday you do celebrate. And wish everybody a Happy New Year. And hopefully it's going to be a prosperous 2012. So, without further ado, I guess meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.